words correctly. And so he was using what he called empty words, which are just like made up words, so you could just sound them out. And so when he finally got to the actual word, he said, the first word I'm going to teach you all how to read is a word that you're probably all familiar with. And so he put it up, and it was, so it was Shabbat, right? And so he goes on to tell this story about the Shabbat. And before we start, though, I'll let you guys pick out what it actually means, what Shabbat actually means. So it's a shin, a bet, and if I can stay on the screen this time, and a tav, or a towel. So what does the shin represent? Or what is the word picture behind the shin? Eat, consume, destroy. What else? Because when you're eating something, or you're using your shins or your teeth,
crushing it down.
You're doing what?
Crushing it down.
Crushing it, or you're ripping it apart, separating it so that you could break it down. Okay, bet.
House and
Okay, and then tav or towel.
mark.
So before I even give you what Shabbat means in a more general sense, what does Shabbat mean?
Separating the house.
Uh-huh. Right, separating the house. Right, so so you have something that's separating the house to or from something, right? So that's what the Shabbat is. So the action of the shin also carries with it the idea of causing something to cease, right? So if you rip something apart, it stops, right? If you kill something, it stops having life, right? So you kind of see the more concrete picture of how this was understood from the Hebrews. Okay, so what the guy pointed out, he brought up this concept, and obviously sometimes Jewish people say stuff, and it makes sense. And he said the Shabbat for him growing up, right? He said was a very, very special day. And he said they went all out. So he said it was not like an ordinary day. And he said, and they did this because his mother believed, one of the rabbis who said that if you keep the Shabbat, then you have kept all 613 laws. Okay? So off top, I did the same thing. I was like, no, right? Right? But something very, very interesting about the Shabbat, if you guys remember from creation, what rests during the Shabbat? Is it just people who are in this covenant house, or is it everyone, right? Yah also rested on the Shabbat, which meant his whole creation rests on the Shabbat, right? Okay, so then I stood in, my wheel started turning, and so I don't know if Maury has a verse. Do you have the verse where Yah asked the people? Was it in Jeremiah?
Yeah,
to keep the Shabbat. Okay, Jeremiah 19, he said, yeah, can you please? And Yah went to the people, and they had broken all of his laws. I mean, we've been going through Jeremiah. And he stopped, and he tells Jeremiah, he's like, look, go to the people and tell them to keep my Shabbat. Just keep my Shabbat, and I'm going to pardon them. Just keep my Shabbat. And the people said, nah, we good. And you're like, what? Because most of the time that's our complaint, right? We're like, wait, keep all these laws? And then Yah was like, all right, I got one for you, keep the Shabbat. So then that made me start thinking back to what this Jewish guy said. Okay, Yah's not saying it's okay to break off. Jeremiah 17 what?
19, start at verse 19.
You want to give it to me? I'll read it. Or,
That's the whole chapter.
okay. So it says, thus saith Yahuwah unto me, so it's Jeremiah talking, go and stand at the gate of the children of the people, whereby the kings of Judah come in, and by the which they go out, and in the gates of Jerusalem, and say unto them, hear ye the word of Yahuwah, ye kings of Judah, and all the inhabitants of Jerusalem that enter in by these gates. Thus saith Yahuwah Elohim, take heed to yourselves, and bear no burden on the Sabbath day, nor bring it in by the gates of Jerusalem. Neither carry forth the burden out of your houses on the Sabbath day, neither do ye any work, but hallow ye the Shabbat day, the Sabbath day, as I commanded your fathers. But they obeyed not, neither inclined their ear, but made their neck stiff, that they might not hear nor receive instruction. Okay, so we point out that if you keep the Shabbat, right, that you've kept all these laws. So I went back to this, I'm like, wow, after all the stuff that Yah said in Jeremiah, and we know it's a lot, he talked about the preachers, he stopped and he said, look, just go stand in the gate and tell them to keep the Shabbat. Because when a people has become so debased that you won't even rest because Yah said rest, Yah says sit down, you stand up. Yah says stand up, you sit down. Yah says, okay, look, you guys are working. How about just take a day off? No, we want to go to work. Right? But you complain about having to go to work all week long, and then on the day that Yah says to not do work, that's the day that you're going to continue to do work.
Overtime.
Right? Okay, so when he pointed that, I said, wow, very interesting. And then I started thinking about the creation idea, and I went and spoke to Maury, and I said, you know, it's very interesting. They brought that up, and I shared with him the whole story. And I said, the thing that stuck out to me the most is, if there was ever a day to be pardoned, it would be the day when the judge also sat still.
That's right.
Right? So not only is creation obeying, but Yah obeys his own Shabbat. So he also stops. So wouldn't you want to sit down on that day with him and be able to at least receive some understanding so that when he gets back up and goes back to work to judge and to separate and to destroy and to heal, that somehow you find favor in his eyes, because on the day when he sat down and when he didn't have to worry about anything else, you could actually talk to him one-on-one. He stops everything. We don't see it, I was explaining. We don't see it in the natural world, but I'm sure while everything does what it's doing, it also stops doing what it's obligated to do. Right? So people ask me all the time, well, how do I keep the Shabbat? Do I not do this? Do I not do that? Do I not do this? And it carries with the idea of obligation. So while Yah is not obligated on the Shabbat to work, he still sustains the universe. Right? He could just say that all that I do that holds everything together, that stops too. No, he still is exercising his power, but at the same time, everything's doing it because he set it up to do it. It's doing it now to his glory. I don't have to tell the birds to do this, and I don't have to tell the oxygen to keep breathing. Why? Because on this day, while it still is responsible for sustaining the whole universe, the air and the water, it does it because it wants to, not because it's obligated to. And so when you think about the Shabbat, that should be what's in your mind. Because I have a lot of people who struggle with what to do and what not to do. But move from obligation to it's a joy to do this. And so the guy ended with how he said Shabbat was the one day where we didn't get yelled at. You know what I mean? We didn't get in trouble because everybody understood, like, we all want to make this a day to where it could be an enjoyable day. He said it's the one day where I had my parents' undivided attention. It was the one day where we really, really did things out of our heart and not because we were obligated to do it. So for all you people who keep the Shabbat, think of that when you're doing it. Because sometimes even the Shabbat can feel like a burden when you have people putting unnecessary burdens on the Shabbat. But if you think of it as, I don't want to do anything out of obligation. So anytime you feel obligated to do something on Shabbat, don't do it. Right? Isn't that making it a lot easier? Okay. So that's Shabbat. So on this day, we want to work on separating or pulling ourselves away from the world and to the house and the covenant. Because for the rest of the week, we're going to be pulling ourselves away from the house, and sometimes a lot of people away from the covenant too. So let's just work on that this week.